to the
Hi.
party,
No,
but
no,
hey,
not at all. You're just on time.
perfect.
Yeah, we're just going to
Are you
begin.
Aishwarya, by the way? Oh wait,
No,
who's
Aishwarya is here.
Hi, I'm here.
Yeah.
okay? All right, I'm just okay. I've just got a message.
Yeah.
Okay, okay. Now your name's popping up. Okay, Tara, Ayushi, Aakash. Hi everyone.
Hi.
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 It's just like a broken hi, everyone.
Yeah,
So this initial couple minutes is always, at least it's my least favorite part of any episode I record, is always of starting it. It's like,
Right.
Yeah.
hi.
Yeah, the small talk, right? The
Do you
dreaded
guys
small
always record on video, or do you guys like alternate? Or...
We've always recorded on video, but since the midway through season 2, we've also started putting up the whole video on YouTube. So now
Right.
all episodes are like available in video and audio format, which is fun for us.
Yeah.
But I mean, when we started, we used to record in person in a
Yeah,
studio.
no, same here. Yeah.
We only moved to Zoom. I mean, with the pandemic.
2020, yeah. Both of your podcasts are IVM podcasts. I think even Zain's podcast is.
Right. That's
Yeah.
actually why I think I heard of your podcast,
Yeah.
Ayushi.
Yeah,
because
same. I was like,
Yeah.
wait.
Yeah, exactly. As soon as Aishwarya said, so there's Ayushi speaking from
Agla
sorry, what was
Station.
it?
Agla Station
Agla
Adulthood,
Station.
yeah.
I love the
It's
name.
like, wait, I know the name. Yeah.
Both of your
Yeah.
podcasts are very interesting
Creative.
names.
very
Yeah.
creative.
Yeah. So we'll
Yeah.
begin at 5:05. We just see if any more people are going to join, and it'll also be live streamed on YouTube. So yeah.
Mhm.
Can I have the link for the live stream on YouTube? Not embarrassing at all, but my mom wants to see.
Sure.
Oh,
Can
that's so
we
sweet.
Set the link on the chat box.
That is so cute. Yes.
Yeah.
I'll just share the link.
That's very supportive.
By the way, just to apologize to all of you guys who organized this, because I've just been very not promoting it on social media because I've just been off social media for the last week. I've just been taking a much needed detox. I mean, I saw.
totally understand that.
Yeah. So I mean, I saw your messages. Like, I'd go onto the browser maybe once in a day to just check my messages, and that's why I saw the messages. I was like, shit, I don't know how to do this from a browser, but from a phone, it's fine. But I'm glad that there's been a good response nonetheless.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not to say that my posting would have made it an even greater response. But yeah.
No, we get it. Yeah. And we all need that detox once in a while, right? I think in the pandemic, it's a lot of reliance on social media.
Exactly. And I could start to feel that spiral coming, which is why I was like, all right, you know what? I need a week or two away from this.
I am going to need that week next week. This is the 4th podcast related thing I've recorded this week.
Oh my God.
And I am sick of my own voice. I'm sick of putting it out on Instagram, being like, hey, come and listen to me yet again. I mean, not to say anything against this panel, it's so exciting. But I really wish I hadn't had to do 3 hours of recording this week before this 1 hour.
Yeah, actually, burnout is something that happens, right? When you do a lot of recording.
Yeah, and it's that tech burnout because you're just constantly looking at the screen and
same formats.
Yeah, exactly.
And interestingly, it's not as tiring when you do it in person. At least I felt that in my experience. Like, I feel like
not at all.
Maybe 3 more talks versus, oh shit, I have to do 4 virtual talks this week. Okay. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Interesting how that works. Feed off energy.
Yeah, and when you're in the studio together, it's just at least because I record with Ritasha, it's we host it together. It's a lot more fun to feed off each other's physical energy also, and the animated way that you speak, or at least the way that I speak, is it winds us up more, and then we get crazier and crazier, and that makes for a more entertaining episode at least.
Exactly. I mean, I feel that same. So I also teach part-time, or rather I was teaching part-time at TSM. And then when the lockdown happened, we were obviously teaching virtually. I found that it was much harder to teach virtually. And just because, everything that I thought I could comfortably cram in an hour and a half of a class suddenly seemed that it had to take over 2 classes.
Yeah.
But then, of course, it's also a different dynamic where sometimes the students put off their cameras but they accidentally turn them on, and then you find them just like lying like this on their beds, just like listening to your lecture, and you're like, okay, this is a different kind of energy I have to work with now.
Yeah. Okay, so let's begin. And this is also going to be live on YouTube. So we'll share the link with you after it's done. And you can
it
also
is live. Yeah.
promote that. And
Yashwina has shared.
Yeah, I just shared the link in the chat box.
Okay,
If
great.
anyone wants to send it to their loved ones.
Send it to my mom.
Yeah. So thanks everybody for joining in today. Welcome to the panel discussion. Hi, welcome Prachi. So for those of you joining in, can you please can you please introduce yourself in the chat box? We can use the chat box for questions, all of those things. And those who are not the panel members, can we just keep our videos off because it's less confusing. We're all trying to figure out how to do this on Zoom. Okay. So let me begin by introducing Bound, and then I will go on to introduce the panel members. So we are a storytelling company. I began Bound around 3 years ago because I wanted to help creatives build their skills. So we're a team of bookworms. We love, we're editors. We love stories. And we started off with a writing retreat, and then we expanded to sort of all kinds of storytelling. So we conducted over 120 classes, online classes and offline, on different sort of aspects of storytelling. And we started, one second. Sorry about that. Yeah, and we started our own podcast. I don't know how long it's been, but okay, I think last year sometime. Which has been doing really well. It's an author interview podcast. We recently started another one as well called The Book People, where we interview publishing professionals. So it's been a very interesting journey for us, and we're very excited to start this podcasting community. So we love building communities. We have a community of writers, and we've learned a lot from each other during the time that we've known each other. There's a lot of insights, and we felt that there was not that much of podcasting community in India because podcasting is really, really new. So we decided, let's just go ahead and create something. So we created PodSquad and we have over 120 members in our WhatsApp group, and the link for the WhatsApp group is in the chat box. So, whoever wants to join, you can share that link with your friends. Please join in because we do some very interesting activities on it every day and on our Instagram account. I will also share the info about the writers as well. We'll share that with you. Okay, so let me introduce who we have with us today. And then Michelle, you can introduce Books and Beyond and yourself as well. So we have Ayushi Amin today with us. She's the host of a very popular co-host. Yes. And by the way, very interesting is that we're all co-hosts here except Aakash, who is a guest. I will come to you, Aakash. But okay, so Ayushi is a co-host of Agla Station Adulthood. I really, really love this podcast. I started listening to it, I think last year during the pandemic. And it's really, like heartwarming. It's funny. She and her co-host Ritasha discuss all kinds of themes related to adulting, right? I love the name, Agla Station Adulthood. And it's basically, it covers a whole range of topics like dating, living alone, friendship, sexuality, all kinds of, interesting topics are being discussed on this episode. And they're on their season 2 right now. I just saw that you have episode 35 or 36 out of season 1. So congrats on that.
Thank you.
Then we have Zain Calcuttawala. He's a music producer and a composer, and he hosts Marbles Lost and Found. Again, I love the name. I love all of these very interesting names, but it's a very interesting podcast because it shares conversations about mental health to sort of, demystify the stigma around it. And it tackles very important topics like body image, dealing with grief, self-care, which are very pertinent today.
Again, co-host.
He's a co-host. He's a co-host. His co-host is Avanti. And then we have Aakash Ranison, who I've known for quite some time. He does some very, very interesting work, and I was very excited to have him here today. He's a climate activist. He shares his philosophy on sustainability as a guest on many popular podcasts. He's come on How's the Josh, When We Met, Ethically Yours. And Aakash, I saw that you finally put up your ebook, which looks fantastic. We
Yeah,
downloaded
we
it,
loved it.
looked at it. So congrats on that. That's really amazing. Okay, Michelle, you want to introduce?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm Michelle. I'm the managing editor at Bound, and I'm the co-host of the podcast Books and Beyond. And we've had over 100K downloads by now. So thank you so much for listening. As you all know, it's a podcast where we talk to writers and find out about their creative processes. So all you writers out there, we do hope that each episode gives you a different insight into the world of writers. So today we're actually going to be covering something very interesting. We're going to be talking about how podcasts start important conversations, right? So the very first thing that I would like to open up to all of our panelists and you, Tara, as well, is what exactly does important mean to you, right? And I would say who decides what is important and what's not? I would like to start the conversation that way. So maybe Ayushi, would you like to go?
I was like, don't pick me. No, I mean, first of all, thanks for having me. This is quite fun. In terms of what qualifies as an important topic or something that is worth discussing is actually in itself a topic that Ritasha and I struggle with a lot, because we sometimes hit this roadblock where we don't know what the next topic should be, where we're like, what do we talk about? What can we still keep talking about? And then invariably something comes up in your normal day-to-day life that you're like, this is worth us. If we've spent like 15 minutes WhatsApping about it, there's a conversation to be had. So when you say what's important, I think first of all, it's very contextual. It is subjective, but if it means, and this is such a basic way of explaining it, so excuse me for doing it that way, but if it means something to you as the host, at least this is how we do it, it means that we have enough connection and passion behind it to speak about it and to turn it into an hour-long episode, or sometimes even longer. And that in itself is importance enough for us. And the minute we find something important, we're able to put in so much more effort and like joy and passion into it that it automatically seems like, oh, this was a massive topic just waiting to be discussed. Like, why is no one talking about this? So yeah, I personally don't have a way of saying that this is important, this is not. Of course, there are some major ones that like stick out, like finance, should talk about that, like feminism, like equal opportunity. Yes, those are important topics. But other than that, I mean, sometimes we just want to talk about, I don't know, been drinking a lot. What does that mean for us? So it just depends on what's important to you.
I think I totally agree with you, Ayushi. I love the point that you said, if the hosts connect on the topic or if they are passionate about it, that comes across and it's worth to have that conversation.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Zain, what do you think?
I really like what you said, Ayushi, about it being, contextual and subjective, because it really is, especially with the format of a podcast. There are much fewer boundaries to entry when it comes to creating a podcast. In fact, as far as putting a podcast out, it is super easy to do so. Chances are, in the hopes that if it means something to you as a host, as say Ayushi said, if it means something to you, chances are it'll mean something to somebody else, whether or not that is a very niche audience or whether that's a much larger audience is contextual and subjective, as she said. But what I like about the format of the podcast is that there is so much room for alternative topics or less discussed topics that you may not necessarily find in more mainstream contexts. And I think there's validity and importance to that as well. Like, for example, a friend of mine put me onto 2 podcasts recently. One which is called Art Holes, which is basically a podcast to do with art history, told from the context of someone who has absolutely zero education with art history whatsoever. So he's done his research as a guy and just been like, yo, this is what I missed out in high school, and here's how I'm going to explain it to you. And it's done in such a approachable way that me, as someone who missed out on a lot of history classes and on a lot of history in school, because back then for me at least it was just about learning dates, now I'm picking up on that with this. There's another one called Ear Hustle, which is an amazing podcast based in the San Quentin Penitentiary, which is made by the inmates, giving people in the outside world a context of what it is like to live in prison when you're doing 15 to life and whatever. So these are things that I don't necessarily even think of looking into. A friend was like, hey, I thought of this podcast. It's like, wow, okay, this is worth listening to just to check out. It's kind of like you don't know that it's interesting until you actually hear that it exists.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. What do you have to say, Aakash?
What I feel today in this age of social media and where we are connected to internet, that earlier there were so many things we were not talking about, right? So at that point of time you could say that, okay, that's not really important because we are not really touching upon those topics, we are not really exploring these sides or fields. But today uh, everyone is trying to do something new because there's saturation in other spaces. So we are trying to go to new spaces, or let's say in terms of climate change, there are so many problems that we are creating that we want to create some solution, find some solutions for it. And that is why we are learning so much. Let's say if we go a decade ago, what do we call climate change wasn't really an important issue to learn about. It wasn't important. If we go a decade ago, let's say mental health wasn't really important. It was important inside, but in terms of content, it wasn't really important. So I think the way internet has helped us, or platforms like Instagram, or now let's say voice platforms where we do podcast or audio chats, or YouTube, has enabled us and has changed the meaning of important. And that in a way is helping us beat the saturation, because the kind of content we have been consuming for years and years, now we're getting the possibility of changing it. And that's the reason why I think there are so many new podcasts coming up talking on different topics which we find important. So I think change is the only constant thing, and important is a part of the change.
Yeah, you guys actually, and your hustle looks really, really interesting. Thanks for the recommendation.
Yeah, that sounds wild.
We'll check it
You're
out.
welcome.
Yeah.
It's a really, really interesting podcast. 100%
Yeah.
recommended.
Yeah. So, but it sort of brings me to my next question, which you guys have already answered. Why are we even choosing podcasting as a medium for these conversations? There are books to write. There's so many, other ways in which we can disseminate these sort of topics. But I also want to ask Aakash, since you're a guest, it's a very interesting place to be because you're not the one interviewing, but you're the one getting interviewed. And in a way, you get to really spread your message and say whatever you want, on these various podcasts. So, but has anything come out of these conversations? What has come out of these conversations for you, and do they really make an impact?
Uh, so yeah, they do make an impact for sure. When I'm talking about climate change, and for me, impact can be, let's say, even reaching out to one person and forget the other person as a listener. Even if I'm reaching out to the person who's the one interviewing me, the host of the podcast, and if I'm able to explain him or slash her, and make him slash her convinced that yeah, climate change is real, and this person, one person wants to make the change, I'm happy, right? And does it make any difference? Yeah, it does make a difference, because when I'm talking to different hosts from different podcasts, they all want my narrative of climate change to fit into their narrative. Let's say, for example, if it's an educational podcast, they want to communicate the same message in a different way. But then I've been on a podcast which is about financial education. If they talk to me about climate change in a very different way, and I talk to them about economy itself, right? That how climate change is impacting economy, and I give different examples about, let's say, if you have a debit card, a credit card, the limit is 50,000, but now you're going and spending 60,000. It's a crisis, right? So how they give me an opportunity to look at my subject in a different way, right? And I've been on a podcast which is about books, all about books. So how that thing brings me to talk about climate change, right? So I think being on very different podcasts do give me an opportunity to look at my subject itself in a different way. And mostly I believe that whenever I have been on any podcast, I really felt that, okay, this was really a good time invested in it, because people really will get to learn or understand something new about climate change. And also, I
Right,
think
right.
one more thing I
Yeah.
can say here to add on into the podcasting specifically, whenever it comes to book, whenever it comes to an article or anywhere else, climate change is being spoken in a very technical language with a lot of jargons. But whenever I'm speaking on a podcast, so podcast is something which is meant to simplify everything. I think that's the reason people are so engaging with it, whether it's about music, whether it's about mental health or adultering or any other topic. The reason I think we are uh, listening to podcasts, or I think that I find it's a good medium to be on and talk about my subject, is because we talk in a very simple language, right? Because it's a conversation. I'm not here with a prepared speech which I have to read out to you guys. And then I'm like, hey, I invested like 2 hours writing all the difficult words so that I can make everyone feel that, hey, I'm so intellectual and I'm so intelligent that I know everything. Here, it's just a conversation. And I think that's what people really want now, when we have spent so many years reading books, which makes no sense that much, because like so many jargons, and people don't want jargons. They want, hey, can you explain it to me easily? So I think podcast is like
Hmm.
asan bhasha mein.
Wow, I think, and this conversation is flowing so well. It's actually just driving us into our next question. So our next question was actually exactly that, like finding out how do you make these difficult topics accessible, right? So me and Tara actually go to such an extent to make any topic, I think, accessible to the listener. So for example, ours is a literary podcast, right? There are a lot of literary terms and jargon. So for example, on one episode we spoke about the unreliable, would be aware of the term, so we'll actually break it down and explain it to them through our question itself. So we want to know, all of you tackle such difficult intense topics, so how do you make it accessible to the public? Ayushi, Zen, anyone?
Ayushi, please go ahead.
um how do you make it accessible? How do you I think it kind of matches up with what you guys have been saying in terms of it's a conversation, right? So you're not the basis of our show has always been two friends talking to each other, and in between that there is some subject, there is a topic, and there is some navigation of how that relates to us as adults, or that the fact that we're trying to be functional. And we say this a lot, functional adults, but if you ask me even now what's the definition of a functional adult, I couldn't tell you. I really couldn't tell you. But in terms of making things accessible, what we found, at least between Ritasha and I, is that the more we admit that we don't know something, if we don't know it, we admit that we don't. We also are very upfront about saying where we could be wrong about this opinion, but it's an opinion. So like, back off, don't come for us on this. It's just what we're saying right now. And then we talk about what we find is the most relatable way of explaining our point of view to each other. And I find if I can connect to her and I can explain something to her and she can explain something to me, and oftentimes a guest, which has been great so far for us, you've been able to turn any conversation into an accessible piece of information, because it just feels like you're hanging out with your friend. That was the whole premise of the show. That was at some point the only way that we knew how to communicate ideas to each other. And we used to talk so much as friends. We were like, we just need a record. We just need someone to record us while we are chatting, because this is gold. This is like Pulitzer Prize winning gold is how we used to start. So yeah, making it relatable has just been about, if I can explain something to you and you can explain it to me, baseline, we should be okay.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think the way Marbles Lost and Found was structured was keeping that exact thing in mind. So I suppose on like a grander scale, there's a lot to be said about, making a topic that would otherwise be deemed inaccessible, approachable, just by approaching it in the context of a conversation that you might have with a friend. So the thing is, are there topics that Marbles Lost and Found delves into that are heavy? Absolutely, that there are. In fact, we have a precursor to each episode. We have a trigger warning for those episodes saying, we will be delving into some very sensitive things. We may mention what those sensitive things are, so listener discretion is advised. But even then, yes, as we go on through these conversations, at least in my experience, talking about various things that affect mental health, and frankly, everything affects mental health when you think about it. But with the topics that we've discussed, even if they are even if they are to do with something very heavy, like say the 2 episodes that we did in season 2 that are to do with grief, those are, I would say, 2 of the more somber episodes that we've done. But within that, we still have moments where we're still able to laugh, we're still able to crack a joke. I think that, speaking specifically about the context of our mental health podcast, it's not like you're painting a picture with one single shade of color. If you're talking about something that is on the that's sad, it's not just that single monochromatic emotion that you're dealing with. Fine, the subject matter is quote unquote sad, but then there are moments where you can laugh about it. There are moments where you can joke about it in the context of whomever it is we're speaking to. That sort of like diffuses some of the tension. How you do that, I think it's a little bit more nuanced than listing bullet points as to how you engage a topic. It really boiled down to how Avanti and I interacted with each other as friends and how we interacted with whomever we were speaking to as a guest. But yeah, the point is, we're taking a topic that we know from the get-go, mental health is, inaccessible. And when Marbles started, it was just around that time that mental health was starting to become a conversation in mainstream media, or just before that. So if I feel like we can kind of toot our own horn and say like, hey, we were one of the first groups of people that started to push that conversation. We're certainly the first mental health podcast in India. So, were the first mental health podcast in India. So it was, I would like to think that with that approach that we had, it started to allow those gates to open further.
No, I like what you said about, talking talking to a friend, and as if you're talking to a friend, because that's what we do as well. And it's interesting that we're all sort of two host podcasts. But it does make it easier. So, oftentimes, we just recorded an episode where we were speaking about, do books have social and moral obligations? Should books have trigger warnings? And it was a very interesting topic of conversation. And even just to unpack that, we just sort of like bounced ideas off each other and explain our point of view to each other, and that really helped a lot make it accessible. But I also want to come to the question, when we're talking about all these topics and we interview all kinds of people, people doing research, people who are Ramayana scholars, people speaking about very difficult topics as well. We've interviewed right from people who, talking about LGBTQ inclusion in the workplace, to women's issues, to violence against women. We always feel a bit sort of unsure when we're trying to unpack these issues, because we are not the experts. We are just talking about, these topics and trying to sort of bring these topics to our listeners and unpack some of the issues that come along with them. But there's always that little bit of hesitation, are we treating these topics fairly? We are not the experts. So how do you guys navigate that when, Aakash, when you're on a podcast or when you're sort of having a guest on? Zain, I know your co-host is a therapist. Maybe that would help. But yeah, how is it for you guys?
I think this is a really good question, because I actually have a lot of firsthand, experience with this. So, and in the first season, when we started talking, just the word guys was a word that is in my dictionary. It is
Yeah,
just in
I
my
got
dictionary.
that
You
too,
can
yeah.
call it South Bombay. You can call it, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. I say guys a lot, like, and I don't mean it in any certain way. I say like a lot as well. Um, and our producer at the time, and even Ritasha at the time, was like, you need to stop saying guys. And I said, what do you mean? She's saying, because you're not just talking to guys, you're talking to everyone, like, across the gender spectrum. And at first I was like, oh, you've got to be kidding me. Like, you don't think anyone's actually going to take offense to that? They know that I don't mean to, but you don't know. And we had this entire thing. And then after that, every episode I kept correcting myself. And I was like, no, I shouldn't say, I say everyone. And then if you say girls and guys, you're like, wait, but no, there's more on that spectrum as well. So I used to do so much research before every single episode to make sure that I was educated on something, and that I was, not caught unaware by where the conversation went. And I was obsessed. I was really, really obsessed with making sure that it was smart and it had the right information, and it gave the listeners some value add. And then I realized that, why am I pretending to be an expert on something that I'm not? In fact, what we've realized in the last season has been admitting that you don't know, and admitting that you yourself are a bit nervous, but you're willing to learn and be open about what's the right way, or what's the friendliest, the warmest way to address any topic, has been far more fulfilling in terms of for us as hosts to learn. But I also think for our listeners to understand that, hey, these guys also don't always get it right. And I have gone back to saying guys. I say guys. And I've said it 1,000 times in the show, being like, I mean all of you. Okay? Everyone is a guy to me. Accept it. And it's a small example, but it cropped up a lot. People wrote in and said that that's a little alienating, and I didn't understand. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that you have to admit that you don't know. The minute you start masquerading as someone that knows the right way to approach something, you're going to get caught in a trap. And the traps, it's a minefield. Like, you don't know where to step. I don't know what gets you into trouble anymore. And I don't mean that in a rude way. It's just a lot of pressure to say things. I mean, when we did sexual health and wellness, there was some conversation that we wanted to have. And it was like, don't say this. You can say this, maybe you can say this, you don't want to talk about that. And then you realize that maybe a conversation is triggering for someone. Like the fact that Zain said that you have trigger warnings. Right now in my head, I just thought, man, some of our episodes should have trigger warnings. Maybe that's something that we should do right now. I never thought about it. But I learned, and I'm going to go through the deck and be like, we should add some on these. But I think admitting that you're also learning is very much a part of our show, because that's adulting, that's life. So yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Aakash?
Then
Or should I go? Okay, I'll go. All right, fine.
There's a little awkward silence in the middle where I'm like, not sure. Should I keep going?
I was just
Can
not,
they hear
like,
me?
A lot of food for thought. So that was
Yeah,
a
I
thoughtful
think.
silence.
Yeah. Oh shoot, I completely blanked. All right. Yeah. So I think oh god, I totally blanked. I'm so sorry. Aakash, please go ahead, because my brain just went poof at this awkward silence. Sorry.
You're on mute,
You're
Akash.
on mute. Yeah.
Sorry. I don't want you to, like, in case somebody comes and talk to me, I'm like, so be on sure. So I just want Tara to help me get back to the question back again.
Okay, so I was saying that, sometimes when we are interviewing people, we are not the experts, and maybe the topic is something that obviously requires a lot of research, like sexual health, for example, so how sometimes we feel like we're not the experts, but how do we unpack this topic? So what do you have to say about that? Because
For
you
me,
kind of
okay.
are an expert. You're the guest that
Yeah, I
talks.
was going to say,
Exactly.
he's
So
the
I
one
want,
that we
yeah.
are nervous
How
about.
How does he feel about the interviewers?
Yeah.
So I tell you, I think the easiest way, if let's say,
Gossip
for
now.
example, you then, so usually see, if in case, imagine the scenario, you are the host, you're calling me that, hey, this guy is the expert, let's call him on board and let's interview him. Or let's say, even if two friends are there, right? What I feel the best way is playing the good cop and the bad cop, right? Saying out very clearly, I don't know what to do. So that's why I'm calling Akash on board to learn everything from him. So I, the host of the podcast, I am representing all of my listeners community that, hey, we are all together. Let's talk to this guy and let's ask him everything. I think that's the easiest way. So in this case, even if you're asking the wrong question, right? In case you're forget about answer, you're asking the question itself wrong. You're fine. I told you in the start itself that like what Ayushi said, that accepting that we don't know, it's really liberating. And also I think it's uh, the point which I said earlier, or also it can come in terms of content as well, making it organic, making it
Yeah.
real, realistic, not pretending, not faking it up, not saying that I'm a genius. Because see, understand the reason now we are able, now we like individuals who are really nothing like 5 years or a decade ago in our life, nobody knew us. How is it today we are at a stage where so many people know us and they really love the content we create? I think the reason is, no, still I would say that Ayushi, a lot of people do love the content you create, and I tell you the reason very simply is that, hey, I can't be Shah Rukh Khan, I can't be Salman, right? Because they never show that, okay, in reality I'm like this. So they are always staged on this level, and they do the things which are done on this level, but then new guys came up, like guys and girls all together came up, and they are here like everyone else, but they do the stuff which is here and then they come back to this place. So it's more like Zen, more like Ayushi, who go here, who talk on topics which they are really expert, or they are able to run a podcast, which is for most people who don't run is like amazing thing. But then they again come back, hey, I'm a normal guy, I'm Zen and I'm Ayushi. So then I, as a listener, connects to them very well that, hey, I can do it as well. And this guy is not pretending to be so amazing like Salman or Shah Rukh or Hrithik, that I can't even connect to these people, because obviously Shah Rukh has so much money he can make the body, but then a normal guy who shows me that I live in a normal 1 BHK house, I go to this normal gym, I eat the normal food, and I'm able to get to this body, then that's how I connect with this guy. So I think that's very easy when you're doing a podcast. If you keep it very real, that, hey, I don't know, I'm like you. I'm representing you. I created a podcast for everyone, our community. And now I go and talk to people about finance, about climate, about environment, about music. And I think that's very easy. So then in that case, we won't feel that we are lying to people, or we don't have to go to internet and learn jargons things so that we can pretend to interview.
I just have one follow-up question. Suppose the person who's interviewing you is not very well informed, or asks the wrong questions or whatever, treats the topic the way that you wouldn't want. What's your reaction usually? Like, how do you
So
deal with
I think that's the perfect thing if somebody does it,
that? Oh,
because that is what is happening in reality out there, that people don't understand what is mental health. You be like, hey, you're playing good cricket, you're doing this, you're going to office, what mental health are you talking about? That's what I'm saying. This is not, if I'm playing cricket in the evening, I'm going to office, and you think that I'm sleeping, and you think that I'm very good at mental, and my mental health is very good, then sorry. This is what this podcast is about, that no, if somebody is doing these three things and you think that on social media they're very happy, no. And if you think that, hey, it's so cold, I'm wearing a jacket in this month where you people are might be using a fan or an AC over there, so I'm like, that's what I'm talking about. This is weather, and what I'm talking about is climate. So I think that's very right. If a host is representing people and he's saying very clearly, I'm not the pro in it, but I'm here, and that's the reason we invited you. Otherwise I would be the one hosting the whole show by myself. That's the reason I have you as a
Correct.
expert, so I can make the mistake and you can correct me. And that's the reason we are in a climate crisis, because everyone is making a mistake of understanding the thing as well. That's the reason we are treating people wrong, because we are not able to understand what is mental health. That's the reason we are taking people for granted. And I think that's why we all run the podcast, and that's the right space to be in.
Right. No, I think I really like that observation, Akash, because yes, while we do know something about the subject, right? Like while even maybe some of us would consider ourselves as experts, I'm very
Yeah.
sure that the listeners might not know a lot of things, which is
Yeah.
where I think you're keeping into account the average listener. And I think that's a very evolved way of looking at things. I think it will make us all, I would say, it would make us empathize with every kind of person who might not be politically correct or who might not be aware of a lot of things, right? So Zain, what do you have to say? I hope you're out of the
now my thoughts are clear. I've got them structured now. It's all good. I think both Aakash and Ayushi put forward some really profound points, really around the idea of not knowing. Yes, Avanti on our podcast is a psychotherapist by profession, so there is that initial credibility from the get-go, but we're not going in with the assumption that we know everything either, which is why we have guests on board where we talk about very specific things. You know, when we talk about grief in the particular episode, Avanti talks about, you know, her previous boyfriend whom, when she was 18, he passed away suddenly in a car accident. And the person that we have on board is someone who lost both her biological father as well as her stepfather. So there is a very, it's a very intense conversation. I know I'm going back a lot to the grief conversation, but it was a good example in this context. But even then, when we talked about, say, the idea of caregiving, which was in season 1, we talked to someone whose dad has suffered from depression as well as from a stroke. So we talked to him about what it meant to be a caregiver in the context of looking after his dad, who's not been doing so well. So we're always approaching it in the hopes of being, you know, open-minded, you know, like, what does this mean? Or what does that mean? And going to something that Aakash said, I think quite succinctly about, you know, the concept of celebrity versus, you know, the normal person. Social hierarchy is so deeply ingrained in Indian society, whether or not we even realize it at times or not. You know, it's so clearly there. There's this huge line that has been drawn in the sand between the different stratas of society, right? Between who is a celebrity and who's just like an average person. And the idea of knowing stuff. We are a country that likes to feel like we know stuff. There's a certain gender within this population as well that likes to make it very clear that they know stuff. I think that's where, well, we know where the term mansplaining comes from. Anyway, so there's a certain idea of like, I know about this topic. And interestingly, I would like to think that with the assistance of certain podcasts, I can't speak for all generations. We do know that older generations tend to be, shall we say, set in their ways as far as forms of thinking. But I would like to think that with the access to content and information that we have now, this may be a bit idealistic, but I would like to think that people are starting to become a little bit more open-minded as compared to what things were like maybe 10 years ago when podcasts weren't really an idea whatsoever, at least in the Indian context.
I think totally the fact that we have a show, I mean, we discuss it a lot amongst ourselves, is that we have a show where we're able to talk about anything under the sun. And we really do get into some tricky, sticky situations sometimes. And both of us have day jobs that are, I mean, okay, Ritasha is in the media industry in that way. I'm not, but we're able to have that. We're able to have the more structured job, and you're still okay. No one's really making a big issue of it. So yeah, in terms of how far we've gotten, I think we've gotten really far. And I'd like to give podcasting as a community, but the whole media community, kind of the credit for just owning it and being like, I'm going to talk about it. Yeah, you're going to have a problem with it, but I'm still going to do it. And hopefully it'll get even better. But we've come a long way. We have. I definitely think so.
No, true. And I think the point is that these conversations need to happen, but unfortunately they don't happen on a regular basis, right? Like ideally when like a family just sits together and chats about things, it's usually like, oh, what's the weather like or whatever. But we ideally want to get these conversations into living rooms, right? That's the idea of, I think, our podcast. And so that brings us to our next question, actually, which is, I think a need for every creator, right? It might not just be a podcaster, a writer. We want to reach as many readers as possible or as many listeners as possible, right? And I think especially with these niche topics, right? Like even relatable topics that you cover, like dating or anything else like work-life balance, which is your latest episode, which is something we all struggle with, right? And if it's about the environment or mental health, ideally everyone should, I would say even listen to it or then probably start a conversation. So how do you actually reach a bigger audience? That is the question. Like, do you actually have certain ways in which you try to, go beyond the audience that you've already covered? And you have like I would say an ideal audience for yourself? What is it like?
I
Zain,
think this
you
is,
have to go first now. They made me go first too much.
I mean, I think this is a very, very good question. And I feel like this question can't be answered. At least I don't believe that this question can be tackled with just saying that the content will speak for itself. I think that's a bit myopic an approach. The content may be solid, but you need a really good strategy to go forward with it. I remember one of the first seminars I did, this was just after the first, this was just a few months after the first season of Marvel's Lost and Fun went on. I did this seminar in Goa, and I did essentially a brief talk about what Marvel's Lost and Fun was about, whom we were reaching out to, and we can start, we can start deconstructing it right now from a very simply. One, first of all, the podcast is in English. We've already narrowed in on the people that we're reaching out to. Two, we're talking about a topic that is in itself kind of nuanced, still at least at that time, a subject that is just about being broached by certain people. So we're narrowing it down even further than that. When I did this talk, a couple of people who worked at various organizations and NGOs and such came up to me and said, what, this sounds amazing and all that. I have one question for you. Why aren't you doing this in Hindi? Or why aren't you doing this in another regional language? Fair question, valid question. One, my Hindi sucks, and two, Avanti's Hindi also sucks. So that just happens to be, unfortunately, one of the main reasons why we haven't really done that. And two, at least at the time, and even now, we still feel like there's a lot more ground to cover, even in the context of, say, our social circles when it comes to mental health. I think that, yes, one can definitely reach larger audiences when, you are diversifying the languages in which you speak. But the things that the podcast medium itself is still already so niche anyway. The podcasts, generally speaking, not always, but generally speaking, at least in India, the ones that have already been bringing in the larger numbers have been ones that have been around for a really long time, or two, have a sort of celebrity within that podcast that already has a certain amount of following. So therefore, they're able to use their celebrity to market the podcast. This is, of course, a big generalization. I'm not saying that's how it's set in stone. So in order to market a podcast, you need a lot more than just the podcast. You need, say, video content. You need, say, seminars, things like we're doing right now, in order to reach other people. You need to also be able to try and move people away from the podcast to say, hey, if you want to check out some of the special things we did, you can log on to our website or log on to our Instagram and see we're doing this sort of thing or that sort of thing. And this is essentially how you're building that kind of network where you have your listeners locked into all aspects of what it is your podcast is doing. There's that added value apart from just the core of what it is you're doing. At least that's what I found with other podcasts that do exactly this. Like, for anyone who's interested in mental health podcasts, Maya Bialik, who was Amy Farrah Fowler on The Big Bang Theory, for anyone who was ever a fan of that show, she's a neuroscientist by profession. Actually, she has a PhD in neuroscience in real life, and she has her own mental health podcast as well, called Mayim Bialik's Breakdown, which is an amazing podcast. Not only does she obviously talk to most of the cast from The Big Bang Theory, but various other people within the comedy spectrum, talking to them about their own stories. But she also has YouTube videos of the podcast being recorded. So there's some value that you'll get from the videos that you may not necessarily get from the audio podcast itself. She has a website which has like extra sort of things and giveaways and blah, 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 blah. So there are all these things that you can do to reach a larger audience.
I think what you said about having a celebrity attached to it is key. For our show, Ritasha is a celebrity for all intents and purposes. She is. And so in terms of her following on social media platforms, it's great and we use it to our advantage all the time. You have a blue tick person who has a swipey link on Instagram, and they can promote stuff at the click of a button. Also, from my experience being attached to a production house that is like, because our show is under IBM, they have there's an entire machinery that is just working on getting your content out. So that definitely works in our benefit. But I think it's this other stuff that you said of having side hustles to the podcast to beef up that entire plate of, that you're serving up for the listener. It's like, sure, you have the audio, but the fact that we went into video this year, we thought that was very exciting because people get to watch us, and we're both an animated duo when we're talking. So it's fun. It's funny to get to watch it as well. It's more engaging. Then we have like an email address where people write into us, and we make sure that we reply to every single person in detail without fail, because we take that so seriously that somebody's taken the time to write to you. You must respect that and write back to them. So even if that listener feels that, they wrote back to us, they care, you might stick around for longer. You might be a more committed listener. And everyone knows, I mean, in terms of like a business, it's better to keep an existing client than go out there and get a new one. So in that sense, casting the net is massive. Like, in terms of, it just depends how much you're willing to invest in it. And I mean time wise and monetarily. Like, if you're willing to promote posts, you're willing to pay to get the get more coverage, to have it promoted across different platforms, you're going to see the results eventually, because this is a business now. There's numbers attached to every single thing. And let's not lie, I think what Zain said, like, the content doesn't always speak for itself. And that's true. This is a money game. And I don't think anyone here should shy away from that or like deny it or tell someone, no, you'll make it organically. You need some amount of backing, and you need some amount of like pushing it. You need to be pushy to the point of annoying people, like 5 times a week posting that, hey, listen, come listen to me again, which is what I have done this week.
Yeah. But I completely agree, and a lot of our community members ask us, how do you get more listeners? And obviously you can't get more listeners if your content is not good.
Yeah, of course. That goes without saying.
But then, that's the basic. Yeah.
So, for us, we have, a broadcast list. We engage a lot with the guest who comes. So we do a lot of campaigns around that guest, tagging them, engaging them, because then for us, our guest is our celebrity. So they'll reach their audiences.
And collabs with other, related to the topic.
Collaboration. So we recently did a podcast about infertility. So this author had written a book about infertility. So we did a collaboration with the PCOS Club of India, so we try and tap into audiences like that. So definitely I agree with, the side hustle. And Aakash, I know you don't have a podcast, but you have a book, you have a lot of content. How do you sort of spread your audience?
So also, okay, let me tell you this thing. It's not out yet, but I've already started recording podcasts.
Oh, congratulations!
So,
I was going to ask, because I had a feeling that you were going to start your own podcast.
That's awesome.
Indeed. For me, it's more like trying different things, and how would I leave podcast behind? Because just a small tiny story. When I was in 9th class, I went to, and I was like cycling here and there. I was like first time going out. I went to a radio station called My FM. I gave an interview over there. They rejected me. I went to Red FM as well to give an interview that I want to become an RJ. So it's kind of like from childhood that I wanted to be on the mic and talk to people, because I think I talk too much. So that's why. But then now I don't need a radio station. I'm not looking for a radio station. I'll start my own podcast, and then people will have to listen to me. But talking about how we can reach out to more people. Obviously, things which have already been mentioned over there, that if you're on podcast, don't leave the other platforms behind. If you can be on video, be there. If you can be on, let's say, your own blog, do that. If you can have a social media presence like Instagram today, have that. Because I really believe, let's imagine I see one small clip of Zain or of Ayushi, 30-second clip in which they are giving me the best of the snippet of that
Yeah.
podcast which they have launched today. I don't know them. I am on Instagram because I am this normal teenage guy who's on Instagram rolling through reels. I see one amazing thing which Zen said into the podcast or Ayushi said in the podcast, and that hooked me. And then now I have to go and check out what did they do over there. Right. So it's like there are so many people already over there. So why don't I just go and tell them once that, hey, there's also some cool stuff, you want to come there and check. So that's why I feel Instagram is pretty important, because we can just within 30s, and we are already creating the content. It's not that we
Yeah.
have to create something new. If we can just distribute it properly. So one is Instagram, and I feel, and today the biggest population is on Instagram or places where we put reels, reel kind of a 30-second vertical content. I create one piece of content. That piece of content goes on. Judge me if you want. It primarily I create it for Instagram, but I do post it on YouTube Shorts, and that is getting me good views and engagement on YouTube as well. When I'm too lazy to create or procrastinating to create another vlog, a full size vlog, at least I can keep posting a YouTube short, and that is getting me more people from there. Another one, there's a platform called Takatak. I post it over there as well because there's so much of audience over there, and the platform is pushing it. A Triller kind of a platform, Facebook, everywhere you can just create one piece and post it over there. So I feel if I'm not just investing 15 more minutes in submitting the same content on different platforms, that's my biggest mistake I'm making today. Another one, I feel that one of the biggest reason that two of the biggest reason that I am wherever I am today is one, that I do not underestimate the power of PR, right? And another, I don't underestimate the power of Google search, right? The reason I'm able to grow very easily, because whatever my important keywords are, if somebody goes on YouTube, on Google, and write them down and search for it, I'm pretty sure that I'm third or fourth on the result, right? So what is the best way? Because who is my best customer, who is my best listener or consumer of my content? The one who's looking for it, rather than me going and randomly telling one guy who's swiping through reels and telling him that, hey, why don't you check out this article, this can be interesting as well, rather than me looking or talking to the guy who is genuinely intentionally looking for it. Where do I find that guy? Anywhere you want to search, there's no way of searching things on Instagram. That you can search on YouTube, you can search on Google, there's no other place you can search, right? So I want to capture YouTube, I want to capture Google search, so that when I am going, let's say, hey, what is mental health, I want to learn, I go write down. That's the only place I'll go, to Google or YouTube. There's no other place. I won't go to TikTok and search, I won't go to Instagram and search, and I won't even go to Wikipedia and search. I would first go to Google, search from there, then eventually go to Wikipedia. So I don't want to miss out on Google, I don't want to miss out on YouTube. Now third and the final one is PR, because I don't want to tell you that I'm good at it. I want somebody else whom you believe he is good, him to tell you that I am good at it, right? And what is that way to do is through PR. And people think that PR is money or you have to spend money on PR. No, I spend 0 rupees on PR, and I'm doing very good at it as of today. And I think the reason it happened is because Messi problems mein tha, where I had no money for years and years. Not that I could wait for like 1 year or 6 months that okay, then I will have money, then I can spend on it. No, I know that I'm not gonna have money. Now what to do? Then it's like, okay, learn and do it. So life give me the right opportunities, but I could really do it. And I'm genuinely telling, whatever the PR, if you, in case you look for my name, you'll find it's zero, not 1 rupee paid. And that really helps me a lot, because let's say now when people are there on my platform, they swiped right, they swiped up on a story, they come to my profile or podcast, or they did it
Correct.
through Google and they came over there. Now is the time I need to set the stage right, that hey, I'm the guy you're looking for. You can't just come listen to the
Get it.
podcast and go back. You have to subscribe. You have to know my name. You have to know my details, number or email ID, whatever it is. You be here. Now I can't let you go. So that's what helps me give them the feel that, okay, it's more like giving them an 5% discount, calling them to the restaurant, but now serving such a good food, they'll be like, shit, I want to take a membership of this space.
Like make them feel important or heard, rather, like you're investing in each person who's coming to your platform, right?
Yeah, it's more like, let's say if I go to Ayushi's one podcast and I listen to it, I'm like blown away that the piece of content this person is putting out is amazing and I have been missing out on it. Or let's say, or understanding that, hey, this person is Forbes 30 under 30. This person is there on that list. So I'm like, hey, I want to do it. So I think these three things which I can say, that not leaving the other platforms behind when we have already created the content, even if let's say you're not doing video.
Reuse.
For example, let's say, yes, right. Ayushi would say that, hey, 1 year ago, I was not creating a video. Then what would I do? I would be like, hey, let's just use a image with some kind of animation of waveform and put your audio over there. It's okay, you don't have a video.
Yeah, that's what we used to do. But then I think video really changed a lot for us because it just made us more relatable. We're
People
not
want to
just
see face.
we're not just a sound in someone's ear where they have to like envision us or the caricature of what we used to use, or just that one stock image of Ritasha and I sitting like together looking real serious. But now we're two real people and you can see our expressions. You can see Tash cry often on the show, and that makes it so much more real for someone who's consuming the content. When we're not lying to you, this is really how we feel. So that makes a difference.
Really helps.
So guys, I think we're out of time, but I do want to ask if any audience members have a question or maybe we have time to take 1 or 2 questions. So does anyone have any questions?
You can either write it in the chat box or even ask directly.
We've taught them everything they need to know about podcasting. Like this conversation has fixed everything. You're going to have like 9 to 10 solid podcasts that come out of this. And we're going to regret it because now we have competition. We've given away the store.
Yeah. So I have one last question before we end. So what are some of the topics that you think need to be amplified more?
Like if you had to pick top 3, because there's a lot, right? We're all passionate about so many things.
Top 3, yeah.
I would say climate change, mental health, and finance literacy. These 3 things.
Right.
I mean, I think I can probably think up topics within the mental health realm, which is something that, things that we haven't necessarily
subtopics,
because where unfortunately Marbles is on an indefinite hiatus right now. But as far as mental health, we still haven't covered, sex and sexuality and gender. We still haven't covered that yet in the context of mental health. We haven't covered, frankly, socioeconomic issues, especially in a country like India, how I mentioned how, there's such a strong social hierarchy in this country, what that means for people, on, shall we say, different sides from different walks of life. Another one as well. Well, I'm sure that actually there has to in a way, what Marbles has not yet done, and very intentionally not done so, is that we haven't delved into, political issues when it comes to mental health as well. And I feel like now more than ever, it's a very critical topic to talk about. Will it alienate people? Will it ruffle feathers? I think any conversation when it comes to politics will. But I still think that it is something that is the need of the hour.
This is our weekly problem. What are we talking about? But you know what? I think my perspective of this has really changed from when we started to where we are now. And I'm grateful for that evolution of myself. I want to thank myself for that. It's more like we want to talk about anything and everything and whatever it is that's crossed our mind. Because, and I'm going back to what I said earlier, if it's engaging me, that's enough for me now. That's so enough, because I'm sure that it's engaging someone else. Because as a 29-year-old who is, who's living in India in 2021, who is working, who is a feminist, and who is educated and is passionate and has like hobbies and thoughts and friends and stuff. I'm not normal. That's a very privileged thing to say. I'm aware. I'm saying, but what is normal conversation to me is actually quite normal to a lot of people across different social stratas and cities actually want to talk about the same things that we talk about on the show. And another thing that we've really thought about is, let's just talk to people who aren't us. So the entire drive this season has been more that anyone who's remotely interesting, that we're like, this is such a cool story. Can you reach out to this person and let's just see what sticks? Like, we throw everything at the wall and then what sticks is like, okay, that's what we're doing this week. I mean, we ran out of things and we said, okay, we'll just download all the dating apps and we'll actually, with all sincerity, try it out. And then we'll do an episode on it. And it was wonderful because it wasn't as shallow as you might think that a dating episode might be. There was so much vulnerability. There was so much, openness and thoughtfulness in the conversation. It was lovely. And I can assure you, guys, girls, everyone would want to know what's going on. And that's just dating. I'm saying we've talked about like organic farming. We've talked about life in the military. We've spoken to people who was married to a soldier who was stationed in the valley. And what is that like? We've talked to, mental health professionals. We've talked to trainers. We've talked to siblings. It's just, I know that I should be saying, let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about sexuality. Let's talk about feminism. Of course, we're going to do all of that. But I don't want to make it seem like that's the only thing that's worth talking about. What makes a conversation real is if it matters to me, it matters to me. And I'm going to do it. And I'm going to talk about it. So,
yeah, I mean, the episodes that we've really loved are episodes that we ourselves are very interested in. And if you're bored, that comes across. And if you're passionate, that always comes across.
Yes, exactly. And so as long as I'm engaged, that's all I need.
Yeah.
But there are some topics that we feel are, that definitely deserve more exposure. It doesn't mean that, of course, there's a hierarchy, like you said, right? There are a lot of relatable things, but also some things which are not probably given that much exposure in public. So one story I think Tara and I just loved reading was Farah Bashir's memoir, right? Rumors of Spring. And we spoke to her about it because, obviously, like Zain also said, there are political things.
Growing up Kashmir.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things, that are covered in various media outlets and a lot of things. And there's usually political things are shush. So we just loved hearing a personal account about something that, people don't really have a clear idea about. So apart from that, I think there were many other stories, especially in our season 3, which was, I would say, which deserve a much bigger platform, right, Tara?
Yeah. So, I mean, we always try to get out stories that are interesting. So we interviewed, we're actually also interviewing, I saw you interviewed Tanushri Podar.
Yeah.
So I actually edited her book, so interviewing her.
Oh my God, she is so cool. Her whole mentality.
I'm not listening to your episode because I want to sort of not have anything in my head.
Oh, but
no influence.
Honestly, listen to that episode. I'm not plugging it because do not listen to it for me.
I record my own episode. But yeah, I'm so happy to chat with all of you guys because it's been very, very insightful, very interesting. I mean, it's always amazing to hear new perspectives, and all of you are doing such amazing work. So thank you so much for that. Keep going strong, and thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thanks for having us. This was
Absolutely.
great. Thank you for the work you guys are doing.
Yeah. And just one final thing, which I think we've all sort of alluded to, but I think even Ayushi said quite clearly, if it's interesting to you, and and you really want to express it, that's all that matters. You could talk about, I'd be interested to see how this podcast would go. You could talk about watching paint dry, but if that's interesting to you and that gin comes across, I'd want to listen to that just to see what that's like, just to see, okay, can I be engaged with someone who's talking about the joy of watching paint dry, or I don't know, whatever. That's the bottom line. If it's interesting to you, that's all that matters.
Yeah, for sure.
Totally. So thank you, and thank you everybody for tuning in, for listening to us. I hope you enjoyed this discussion and hope to have more of these soon. Bye,
Absolutely.
guys.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye.
you.
you.
Bye.
Have a
Take
nice
care.
evening. Bye.
You too.
Take care.